information about places you've already heard about. Hopefully we have a half day ahead of us so we can reach Grandview Point and check out Mesa Arch and the White Rim Overlook. Those sites will give us the best impression of what the park is all about. If we have more than a half day for sightseeing, we'll have enough time to stop at each viewpoint and enjoy a few short hikes as well. I'll tell you about the different things that are available, but the choice, of course, is yours. I will do my best to describe what they're like, but often parking and taking a short walk will give us a great reward. Tour of Canyonlands is going to be all about the island in the sky. But that said, I am here to let you know that this tour does also include the Needle District if we venture south of Moab to extend our touring. And honestly, it's a very worthwhile trip. Coming up on our first, the island part that we're driving into. It'd be a true island if it wasn't for this narrow strip. You may have noticed the remnants of old fencing near the neck. Well, at one point this island was ideal for ranchers. Their herds couldn't get too far away since the land acted like a natural corral here. Today in Canyonlands National Park, the population is around 350. We will soon get to the trailhead to Mesa Arch. I cannot overemphasize how very fragile the biological soil crust is. One footstep could be gone. And since it lives everywhere, please, it is so important to stay on the trails. And remember this, don't bust the crust. All right, we should be approaching the car park soon. You can't miss the turn. When we're done here, we'll have to make a quick choice between continuing straight ahead to Grandview Point or taking a right turn towards Upheaval Dome. But first, again, you really Let's pull into the next roadside turnout coming up quickly on our right. This is Candlestick Tower Overlook. From here, we'll get to see a spectacular pinnacle rising from the valley below. And squash that they grew themselves by the river bottom. Also wild foods that were foraged rather than cultivated, like Indian rice grass, four-wing saltbush, as well as nuts from pinyon trees were brought here to be stored for later use. The granaries were purposely created in well-hidden places that were really hard to reach, and the slabs of rock below protected the food from being pillaged by animals. Keep in mind that the changing climate, especially becoming drier and hotter, made cultivation in this area increasingly more challenging. So the Puebloans eventually migrated further to the southwest. Road, we're going to visit Upheaval Dome, the most peculiar structural feature that has been found in southeastern Utah. Well, that's the way geologist E.T. McKnight described the site when he saw it back in 1940. Since that time, many geologists have studied and written papers about it, but still today the debate remains about how this oddity was created. What it looks like is a wide crater with a big pile of rock in the center. But when you see it, you might find yourself scratching your head trying to figure it out for yourself. What is it really, and how did it form? Was it salt? How would that work? Perfect, they can turn into an arch. As you'll clearly see, whale rock is nowhere near that stage. Think of it as an immature, maybe still developing formation that has a small chance of one day turning into an arch. We are once again crossing the bridge of land that is called the Neck. Now that we've explored the island in the Sky District of Canyonlands, I'm betting you understand where these names came from. From the different viewpoints, we got to see how the island in the sky describes the top of a plateau, or really in this case, a mesa, with cliffs and canyon walls on every side. If you walk off in any direction, eventually you're just going to fall off a steep cliff. And that's walking in any direction except the way that we're driving right now. The Neckists and generals weren't the only ones to know there were some strange minerals in the canyons around here. Though they may not have fully understood all of the qualities of the radioactive minerals, long before there even was a U.S. military, local Native American tribes were using this dirt with magical properties. Yeah, the American Indians around Moab had already discovered radioactive carnotite. That's a soft yellow mineral, sometimes it can be red. And when you grind it into powder, it makes incredible body paint. Body paint was in high demand by Native Americans, and it seems that the radioactive pigment that would glow in the dark was definitely considered a hot item when tribes met and exchanged goods. Later on, the Euro-Americans also used the radioactive mineral as a coloring agent too, in ceramics and paint. In fact, you can still find the odd flower pot or coffee mug out there that'll glow in the dark. And if you put a Geiger counter next to it, oh yeah, you're going to hear that crackle. Now, don't be too concerned about any danger just by being here. In its natural state, it isn't particularly penetrative or harmful. You may have heard the term enriched uranium. That is essentially weapons-grade uranium. Uranium taken from the Earth isn't suitable for weapons production or for use as fuel until it's processed to make it more powerful just yet. And it was a tough time for Charlie and his family. He often had to poach deer to help keep his family fed, and all of his money went towards prospecting supplies. And luckily, a few believers kept extending his credit so he could continue his search. Where most prospectors relied on their Geiger counter, Charlie could only rely on his geology skills and faith. Reason was he couldn't afford a Geiger counter. Let's talk more about the uranium king, Charlie Steen. Everyone thought that Charlie was a little bit of a nut because he believed there was a radioactive ore in the big Indian mining district. But the experts at the Atomic Energy Commission had already written off the area. They all believed there was no high-grade uranium to be found there. But Charlie went on and drilled anyway. And as he was drilling, his equipment broke trying to get through a thick layer of black rock. He was heartbroken at the costly mishap, threw his tools and some of that black rock in his Jeep and just took